Well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Matias Perttula. I get to serve as the director of Save Armenia, a Judeo-Christian alliance. I want to thank you, everybody, for making time to join this briefing on Azerbaijan, why it deserves to be a country of particular concern. There's been some exciting developments over the last couple of weeks on why Azerbaijan is going to be elevated to this level. We wanted to host this discussion to bring a lot more context to this issue, and for folks who are unfamiliar with this process to get a better understanding of how this process works. What are the implications of a CPC status for a country? What does the process look like from here as USCIRF has made this recommendation now to the Department of State? What does the State Department do from here? And if there's an eventual designation of Azerbaijan as CPC, what does that look like going forward? We also want to explore some ideas surrounding what the national security structure for the United States as it comes to the Caucasus regions, Azerbaijan, Armenia, and so on. What does that mean from the national security perspective? So hopefully today's discussion will bring you a lot more information and enlightened perspective on the issues, and really drive home the point that Azerbaijan is a bad actor. They deserve to be at this level. They deserve to be a country of particular concern until they start making changes within their domestic and international policy, especially regional policy, as it pertains to persecuted Armenian Christians. So to help make this case here today, I want to run through our speaker list, and then we want to jump right into the program here. I want to thank, first of all, my co-chair, Tamar Parut, who serves as my co-chair for the Armenia Working Group at the International Religious Freedom Roundtable. Thank you so much for being a part of today's discussion. I want to thank Nadine Maenza. She is a former chair of USCIRF, actually, and currently the president of IRF Secretariat. We're honored to have her join this discussion. Dr. David Curry of Global Christian Relief, president and CEO of that wonderful organization, also joining us with his insights. Also serves currently as a commissioner on USCIRF, however, joining us today in his official capacity as GCR president and CEO. We're also joined by Aram Hamparian from ANCA, the Armenian National Committee of America. He serves there as the executive director of that excellent program, excellent mission, been around for a long time, and probably the largest diaspora organization of Armenian Americans in the world, or Armenians in the world. So we're excited to have him share his insight and his take on the issues. And finally, and certainly not least, my colleague and dear friend, Dan Harre, serves as Deputy Director of Save Armenia with me. We're a brand new organization. We've been on the Armenia issue for about 5 months, or actually less than that, about 3 to 4 months now, officially. We're excited to be in this fight with our partners, with our allies, and we look forward to advocating for persecuted Armenian Christians. So with that, I want to introduce Nadine to kick us off. Nadine, can you tell us a little bit about what is the significance of USCIRF? What's the significance of this report? What's the significance of this whole process, and where does it kind of evolve from here?
Sure, of course, and good afternoon. It's an honor and a privilege to be here and to join such a great panel of friends and experts that care about these. As you heard, I serve as the president of the ARF Secretariat, so we work to build infrastructure to serve the religious freedom movement globally. We convene a Washington, D.C. roundtable and have working groups on many topics, such as the Armenia Working Group that's convening this event today. And we have roundtables in over 30 countries. And I also, as you heard, had the privilege to serve as a White House appointed commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, as we're going to call it, USCIRF, serving my last year as chair ending in May of 2022. So I was able to visit Azerbaijan in an official delegation 2019, and also regularly met with their government officials in Washington, although not with the current ambassador. So while at USCIRF, my hope was to work towards moving Azerbaijan off USCIRF's recommendations for a special watch list. For a few years, I avoided speaking out on conditions there, hoping we could get some traction. But the government has continued to tighten control on religious activities, raid communities they claim are not in compliance, and imprison peaceful believers. And of course, last year, they committed war crimes and ethnic cleansing with a military offensive to forcefully take Nagorno-Karabakh, or Artsakh, forcing over 100,000 mostly Armenian Christians to flee. So in just a few weeks ago, we saw images showing the demolition of St. John the Baptist Church, a 19th century church in Nagorno-Karabakh's Susa area, and the razing of a nearby village with a mosque being built in its place. USARF's decision to recommend Azerbaijan be designated as a country of particular concern was obviously not made lightly. And the fact there was some disagreement among the commissioners is healthy. That's the way it's supposed to work. So let's look at USARF's own reporting on Azerbaijan over the years. In 2019, the USARF started opening country chapters in their annual report with a trajectory of religious freedom conditions. They listed Azerbaijan as having positive overtures. I remember being encouraged. The 2020 report indicated that conditions were, quote, trended positive. And in 2021, it was reported that religious freedom conditions remained largely static. So in 2022, 2023, and in this recent 2024 report, USARF reported that they, quote, trended negative, leading to this CPC designation. Unfortunately, the USARF annual report was the most negative one in the past 6 years, with only one country showing improvements. That was actually not even included in the report. 18 stayed the same, and 10 had deteriorating conditions. So Azerbaijan was one of the 10 with negative trajectory. So 3 years of continued deterioration has led here, after a few years of some improvements. The other countries USARF recommends as a CPC in context would be Afghanistan, Burma, China, Cuba, Eritrea, India, Iran, Nicaragua, Nigeria, North Korea, Pakistan, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Vietnam. While USARF recommends 11 countries be listed on the special watch list, the State Department only lists 5. Algeria, the Central African Republic, Comoros, Vietnam, and in January it added Azerbaijan. So it is noteworthy that the State Department has acknowledged Azerbaijan's severe violations of religious freedom. This USARF report now gives the State Department the information they need to upgrade that designation to a country of particular concern. This recommendation is important because so many rely on USARF to cut through the propaganda and get straight to the truth. As most of you know, USARF is an independent, bipartisan government agency with the mandate to assess religious freedom conditions abroad and make recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and Congress. USARF was created by the International Religious Freedom Act of 1998 that has been since amended. This act also created the State Department's Office of International Religious Freedom and the Ambassador at Large position, who is actually an ad hoc member of the USARF commissioners. USARF is not to consider any impact or on any bilateral relationships or geopolitical factors. There's to be single focused on religious freedom, making the report extremely credible in the United States and globally. Azerbaijan has long promoted a narrative of, quote, religious tolerance, being a model, putting themselves out as a model of a government that embraces religious freedom. Most government officials in the international community, NGOs, and others trying to figure out the truth have struggled with conflicting information. With the State Department's January designation listing Azerbaijan on the special watch list, and now USARF's recommendation for them to be listed as a country of particular concern, their role as a violator of religious freedom is now clear. I urge the U.S. government to follow the USARF recommendation and designate them as a country of particular concern. They should also follow other recommendations made in this report, including to work with the government of Azerbaijan to revise the 2009 religion law that has twice been amended, actually making it worse each time, most recently in 2022. Fortunately, there is specific legal recommendations they can follow to meet international standards from both the Council of Europe's Venice Commission and the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. The U.S. should also work with them to develop an alternative civilian service and permit conscientious objection in line with its own constitution. And USARF also recommended that the U.S. government allocate funding to U.S. aid and the U.S. Embassy in Baku to restore, preserve, and protect places of worship and other religious and cultural sites in Nagorno-Karabakh and surrounding territories. With this CPC recommendation, we have hope that the particularly severe violations of religious freedom happening in Azerbaijan will be impossible for the U.S. government and the international community to ignore. Perhaps more attention will now be given to the vulnerable Armenians who were forced out of Nagorno-Karabakh and the houses of worship and cultural sites in areas under Azerbaijan's control, and that the U.S. government and international community will make the cost of any further military action against Armenia too high, deterring further violence. I hope the trajectory in Azerbaijan will change and that once again we can have hope for improving conditions so all that live in this beautiful country, including Armenian Christians, Shia Muslims, and others, will all be able to practice their faith and follow their conscience peacefully. Thanks so much for letting me be a part of this important discussion.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you for those comments. I definitely have a couple follow-up questions, but we'll save those to the end. Right now, I want to introduce Aram Hamparian from ANCA to come share about the report, but maybe some other evidence to perhaps make the case even stronger for Azerbaijan to be a country of particular concern. So, Aram, over to you.
Okay. Thanks so much. I'd like to start out by thanking USERF for the CPC designation of Azerbaijan. The commissioners who took this stand did so certainly against some pretty strong geopolitical headwinds. Our community is deeply grateful for this principled support, and we remain hopeful that the commissioners who dissented from this conclusion will remain open to the growing body of evidence that supports this designation. In discussing Azerbaijan's CPC designation, it's vital to note that Azerbaijan is targeting Armenians because of our identity as Christian Armenians, an identity deeply connected to our Armenian apostolic faith. I say this as a former altar boy, baptized and married in the church. I served as a Sunday school teacher. The term for us, Hai Christonia, which means Armenian Christian, is essentially interchangeable in almost every circumstance with just being Armenian. As they say, two candles, one flame. You can see this playing out today on the streets in Yerevan. So to grasp the gravity of the crimes committed against Armenians, I would ask you to recall Article 2 of the Genocide Convention, which defines the target groups of genocide. And those include ethnic and religious groups. And clearly, the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, of Artsakh, are an ethno-religious group, so subject to the Genocide Convention. The legal scholar and international prosecutor Luis Moreno Ocampo has specifically cited Azerbaijan's violations of subsection C, Article 2C of the Genocide Convention, where which basically says, defines actions that deliberately inflict upon a group conditions of life calculated to bring about its physical destruction in whole or in part. That's exactly what Azerbaijan did in Nagorno-Karabakh. I share all this to underscore that essentially all of Azerbaijan's violence, its aggression against Armenians, the world's first Christian nation, people targeted because they are Christian, that all of these essentially represent violations of our right to live as Armenians and to live as Christians. That includes the blockade that Azerbaijan imposed for 10 months to starve Armenians, the attack last September that drove Artsakh Armenians from their homes, their indigenous homeland, the illegal detention and abuse of Armenian prisoners of war and the elected leaders of Nagorno-Karabakh, the destruction, and this is very material, the destruction of so many Armenian churches, monasteries, cemeteries, and other holy sites across Nagorno-Karabakh. Purdue University, Cornell University, the Armenian Bar Association, and many others are tracking this destruction, and it's truly troubling. Sad reality here is that Azerbaijan is following in Turkey's footsteps. Turkey, more than a century ago, created this template of exterminating the Armenians, destroying their legacy, and then erasing their memory. Just like Turkey, Azerbaijan is doing this with essentially international impunity. Worse, with active global support, including, sadly, from our own White House, whether it was the Trump White House or the Biden White House. Not through innocent errors of inattention or inaction, but rather with moral and material support, including U.S. military aid to Azerbaijan. Azerbaijan, to this moment, remains eligible for U.S. military aid. U.S. policy, turning a blind eye to every Azerbaijani attack leading up to this past September, basically emboldened Azerbaijan, gave them a green light that they could do what they wanted to do. And then in terms of humanitarian relief, the Biden administration for 2 years did not send a single dollar in humanitarian aid to Nagorno-Karabakh. During the blockade itself, refused to call it a crisis, and then did not airlift aid at all to the starving Armenians there. There was talk from the administration about not tolerating, not countenancing Azeri aggression, but ultimately no action, no sanctions, no designation of genocide, no response to Azerbaijan's occupation today of Armenian soil, no pressure for the release of POWs, no investigation into war crimes, no U.S. leadership at the UN to secure the return of Armenians to Artsakh, a right universally recognized as the right of all peoples to return to their homeland when they're forcibly displaced. Not basically a single step to reverse what is still a reversible genocide. We're very hopeful by the CPC designation by USCIRF and look to the State Department to act on this recommendation as a first step in the right direction.
Excellent. Thank you, Aram. Thank you for those comments. Actually, before we move on to Dr. Curry, could I ask you just one quick follow-up question to what you presented? I'm curious to know, and our viewers might be curious to know, what is the Azeri narrative in a nutshell? Like, how are they couching these attacks in Nagorno-Karabakh and in Armenia proper now? Actually, what is the propaganda here?
Okay, I'll to answer the question, I'll tell a very short story. The author, the father of the Genocide Convention, when he was 21 years old, heard about the Armenian genocide and he heard about what was going on there. And he asked his professor at the University of Lvov, how is it possible that this can take place? And the professor answered saying, if a farmer kills his chickens, that's his business, not yours. And I think Azerbaijan views that this is within our borders, and whatever we do within our borders is acceptable. And no one has the right to tell us that it's wrong. The fact is, Nagorno-Karabakh is the subject of international relations, was the subject of a negotiation, which means that the status and security was supposed to be decided by multiple parties, including Azerbaijan, including Armenia, including the people who live in Nagorno-Karabakh. Sort of this is like a pre-Lemkin, pre-genocide convention view of the world where a dictator can do whatever he wants to his own subjects and the world can have no say in the matter.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. I want to introduce now Dr. David Curry of Global Christian Relief to share a little bit more about the implications of the CPC designation, the process from here on out, and then what does this look like potentially for Azerbaijan. So thank you for joining us, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm so glad that Nadine mentioned St. John the Baptist Church in Susa. This is a church that in the past winter was destroyed, razed to the ground by Armenia. We have multiple proofs around this idea that Christian sites, cemeteries, churches, cultural sites such as this have been destroyed. That picture needs to be forefront in your mind if you want to understand why this designation happened. When you get into the discussion of what genocide is and how particular groups can be targeted, there is a back and forth within this discussion of Azerbaijan and Armenia that I think is sometimes difficult to pin because they say, well, it's about territory. If that's the case, why are these cultural sites, why are these churches specifically being targeted? And more importantly, how is it possible that 120,000 or more people from the same faith can be forcibly pushed out of their homes? It's not an accident. It's just strains credulity. And so a bipartisan group of people on the USCIRF committee, as Nadine mentioned, that our focus had to have been on simply, was this related to the faith of those 120,000 people? There's multiple faiths in this region. We all are aware of that. How is it that 120,000 people, all of the same faith, and then in the backwash of this event, their cultural markers, their holy places are systematically destroyed? That's not insignificant. And so what the USCIRF designation does is it gives the State Department an opportunity. I've been in a part of conversations with those in the State Department who are looking at this, also with the Armenian ambassador and conversations with the Azerbaijani ambassador. And what this allows the State Department to do is have a series of tools, including sanctions. It could be broad sanctions. There's also targeted sanctions, Maenza Act sanctions that could be levied against Azerbaijan or the people taking part in this. I think if Azerbaijan wanted to be a good actor in the midst of this, it would first of all have to recognize the destruction of these cultural sites. It should not be hard to allow people who are fair and objective to come in and see if in fact these were destroyed, confirm their destruction, explain to that. And who are the people, who are the military leaders or civic leaders who have targeted this? Majinsky Act should be able to target those if the state so chose to do so. When you look at the discussions from in my experience, the discussions with the State Department, with Armenia, with Azerbaijan around this revolve around a simple picture, and I want to put it in another form. Just move it outside of politics. Imagine that you had a financial advisor who was overseeing your portfolio, and in this portfolio they had a chunk of your financial portfolio which had losses so great that it washed out everything else that you had going on. And so in order to make it seem as though all was normal, your financial advisor decided, when we review your portfolio, we're not going to discuss this bad part over here. That's the discussions we've had with the State Department. That's the discussions you have with Azerbaijan around this issue. It's literally just parked over here because it's so egregious, it's so clear, it's so targeted against Armenian Christians and not of some other faith and not unrelated to it, that they just are not even going to consider it in the review of your portfolio. That's significant. That's the sort of political games that are being played around this, and I think it needs to be called out. I don't know. I suspect that I know, but I cannot say for sure what the State Department will do with this recommendation, but I think it's clear that what they should do, and they should say that it's a CPC. The State Department's own analysis suggests that all of the other stuff within this other part of the portfolio, what's happening to religious minorities in Azerbaijan, that alone categorizes them within the special watch list, which is a lower category, which has a different set of tools available to the State Department. And if you bring over the very negative picture of targeting of cultural and religious sites and of a particular religious group, in this case Christians in Nagorno-Karabakh, it is clearly a CPC and should be a CPC designation. So that is my hope. That's my observation on it. We shall see. I think that the world is distracted, unfortunately, about a number of things. This is the kind of moral issue that if we collectively, whether you understand all of the dynamics of the region, you can understand this one picture, 120,000 people of the same faith, not coincidentally, were targeted, pushed out of their homes, and then in the wake of that, their cultural and religious sites, holy sites, were destroyed. That's the picture, and that's why I think it's pretty clear that the State Department needs to recognize this as a country of particular concern. Thank you, Matias.
Thank you. That's an excellent analogy and excellent comments on that. There's really no ifs, ands, or buts about the case. I want to now transition us to Dan Harre, my deputy director here at Save Armenia. I want to welcome a couple comments from him regarding the national security aspect to this discussion, particularly as we kind of look at the Caucasus, Armenia, Azerbaijan as a whole. Why does this area, why is it important to the United States from the national security angle? So Dan, I'm going to toss it to you now. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matias, and thank you to the rest of the panelists for your comments. The international religious freedom argument for Armenia is apparent. As Dr. Curry was sharing, the destruction of cultural heritage of cemeteries, of churches is well documented. Those in the foreign policy community will often say, from a realist, foreign policy paradigm, that while the moral argument is present, it is not in the security interest of the United States to support Armenia. This is false, and it's false for a few reasons. Armenia, in the last several years, has begun a very strategic pivot away from the Russian orbit to the West. Russia historically has been its security guarantor. It was essentially the only nation that stepped up to defend the Armenians during the Armenian genocide, when the Turks killed 1.5 million Armenian Christians. More recently, Russia essentially has not had Armenia's back, and so they're looking for new partners. Armenia, while it's a nation not rich in oil or natural gas, is strategically very important because of its geography. Armenia is essentially the first line of defense on Russia's southern border, south of the Caucasus Mountains. There are two major Russian military bases on Armenian soil, and as Armenia continues to drift west, while it's not going to happen, in the next year or two long term, these bases could be jeopardized. Additionally, it is not ridiculous to think that the West at some point could have military assets stationed in Armenia, placing them again along Russia's southern border. And in terms of geography, it's important to know, once you get over the Caucasus Mountains, it is essentially a flat, straight shot to Moscow. This is a massive vulnerability for the Russians, and courting Armenia and bringing it into the Western security architecture would be devastating to the Russian position in the Caucasus and potentially even the broader Middle East. So it provides us a qualitative edge against Russia. Two, it provides us an edge against the Turks, our frenemies, for a number of reasons. Again, mostly relating to geography. The United States is dependent on Turkey for access to the Middle East, and so we are hesitant to call out a number of their human rights abuses, including their greenlighting and support of the Azerbaijan's ethnic cleansing of Nagorno-Karabakh. In theory, if the United States were able to station assets on Armenian soil, it reduces our dependence on Turkey for access to the region. Armenia shares a border with, Armenia shares a border with Turkey and Iran, and so it would give us leverage in our negotiations with Turkey on a whole host of other issues, and frankly, it would just strengthen our hand on a number of things as it relates to the Turks. Thirdly, it provides us, by courting Armenia, it provides the United States with an edge in our competition against China. As you know, China has a sprawling Belt and Road Initiative, which is essentially looking to create an economic apparatus that would challenge American economic hegemony. One alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative is India's supported North-South corridor, which links India with the West. This route runs through Armenia. Courting Armenia and bringing it into the Western fold is critical to seeing this alternative to the Belt and Road Initiative thrive and challenge China's designs. If the United States and the West ultimately don't come to Armenia's aid, Armenia is going to do what it has to do to survive. It will find other partners, and I am willing to bet that China would be happy to rush in and fill that void. So more succinctly, supporting Armenia, while it is, or I should say supporting Armenia while there is an obvious moral argument, it's also in the security interest in the United States as it relates to our relations with both, or I should say including Russia, Turkey, and China.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. Appreciate that. I wonder if there's anything else in terms of national security concerns, and feel free to defer the question if you don't want to, but in terms of how does Russia play in on this screen? How does Russia play in on this in this debate or in this situation right now, from your perspective?
In other words, what is the current status of relations between the two countries?
I'd say that, and then is there a Russian angle to why they may be willing to support the Azeris much more than the Armenians?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, Armenia is a democratic country. Azerbaijan is a petro dictatorship, and so the Kremlin, I think, naturally is going to get along well with Baku. Putin and Aliyev essentially run their countries in the same way. It's based on corruption and sales of energy resources. So there's just a lot of alignment there. Additionally, the Russian relationship with Armenia, as I mentioned, is deteriorating, essentially because Russia did not fulfill its security obligations to Armenia. When the Azeris rolled into Nagorno-Karabakh, the Russians stood down. There were peacekeepers there, and they did nothing. And so as that relationship deteriorates, I think Russia is aware that it's going to need new security partners in the Caucasus, and Azerbaijan is a natural fit. Again, just simply because of the way they run their countries. Yeah.
Very good. Thank you for that.